Yeah, right. Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah, okay. Okay, bye. United Airlines presents Flight 3591 Widow with wings and epaulets. Leaves in-dock seat vacant. Oh, dude. That's really cool. Welcome everyone. Podcasting on a plane. This is an aviation podcast where we discuss things from as many angles as possible and certainly from both sides of the mic. And that's because I'm an air traffic tower controller. But like many, I've done a lot of different things in the industry over the last 25 years or so. And my goal is to share the love of aviation with you so you can do with it what you will. Maybe even make a career out of it. If you're new here, here's what people are saying on iTunes. Hotel Mike from the Bay Area says, Brandon hosts an excellent aviation podcast, and his knowledge of both the ATC and pilot and instructing side of things brings a lot of insights to each episode. For what it's worth, I like it enough to bother making an iTunes account to leave a review. I just had to share that one. Thank you, Hotel Mike. Well, as you can see, when you're here, you're in good company. And speaking of good company, I want to take a minute to say something. And that's that I am really proud of the larger aviation community this week, and here's why. First off, the outpouring of generosity after that Atlas Air crash. If you're not familiar with what happened, go back and check out episode 43. It's called Giant 3591. Details are still a little bit scarce about what happened, but as of this recording, the flight data recorders from the 767 have been recovered, and they should provide some answers pretty quickly, I hope. But the reason I'm really proud of the community is that the GoFundMes for the flight crew and for Sean have done really well. And I want to thank everybody who made a donation. And if you haven't, well, you still can. The show music today is called A Hopeful Tomorrow. And that's a theme I want to get across today. You'll see why in a minute. So check out this article from thepilotwifelife.com. It's called United Airlines Presents Flight 3591 Widow with Wings and Epaulets and Leaves In-Dock Seat Vacant. Here's what it says. On February 23, 2019, tragedy shocked the aviation world when Atlas Flight 3591 went down in Trinity Bay, just outside of Houston, Texas. The flight was a cargo transport from Miami to Houston for Prime Air using a twin-engine Boeing 767, and it had 3 people aboard, Captain Ricky Blakely, First Officer Conrad Aska, and Mesa jumpseater Sean Archuleta. There were no survivors. When tragedy strikes the aviation world, it affects all of us. We're a tight-knit family, and we're all only a few degrees from the incident. If we did not know those involved, we know those who did. We all pray, hope, and believe that these types of events will never rock our world. But when they do, we stand together as one family, regardless of type rating, airline affiliation, or even country of origin. Even though the media did not feel like it was a big story and it quickly fizzled out because the jet was cargo and there apparently weren't enough people aboard to warrant wide coverage, to us, it's our family, and it affects all of us to the core, and it leaves us with an empty hole in our hearts and in our extended family. Captain Archuleta was by all accounts a stand-up guy who was easy to be around and who cared immensely for others. I was friends with and flew with Sean, states Captain Cole Goldenberg. He would have been the first person there for anyone else in a tragedy like this. He was a very special guy. Just before the tragic accident that took his life, Captain Archuleta had been hired by United Airlines and had already been assigned to his class date. He was on his way to the majors. This is a celebratory event that we all look forward to as we move through the life of aviation, and it was not different for the Archuleta family. However, fate took away their moment and left a pilot wife's sister behind with her young children to figure out how to face another day without her captain. In a gesture of kindness, respect, and the utmost class, United Airlines is doing something incredible. During Sean's in-dock class on March 12th, they'll leave a seat vacant in memory of the great loss that rocked the aviation world and the hole that's left in all of our hearts. What an incredibly honorable and classy gesture. Furthermore, they presented his widow with United Airlines wings and epaulets. The story continues as told by United Airlines Captain Gunn. He says, an update regarding Captain Sean Archuleta. He was the jumpseat rider on the Prime Air crash who had a class date to begin at United this week, I believe. I operated Flight 1009 to Bogota on Friday, March 1st. Prior to heading to the airport, I was contacted by the Houston chief pilot and informed that his widow would be on our flight returning to Colombia, where she currently lives. He asked if I could deliver a package to her from United. Of course, I agreed to help in any way that I could. United had her booked in first class and escorted her to the Polaris Club before the flight with plans for a personal escort to the airplane for departure. I coordinated to have her escorted to the plane and to be in her seat about 5 minutes prior to general boarding. His wife, Tatiana, speaks only Spanish, and although I speak some Spanish, it's definitely not conversational. I offered my condolences on behalf of United Airlines and all United pilots. The circumstances were difficult, especially considering that I had never met her. I delivered a stack of condolence cards from both United and Mesa Airlines, his current employer, as well as a set of United wings and epaulets. She was a lovely lady, but she broke down when I gave her the wings. It was clearly very emotional for her to receive the wings. However, I could tell that she was very moved, and it meant a great deal to her. Through the interpretation of the flight attendant, she told me that she would save these for her children to see, and so that they would know that he was a United pilot. I simply said that it would have been a pleasure and an honor to fly with her husband. She thanked me and told me that United had been very good to her, and that she was grateful for their support. It appears that United stepped up and treated her with respect, and helped an already tragic situation. Hats off for the awesome gesture of kindness, respect, and utmost class. I think the fact that they did not feel the need to publicize their act of kindness is even more upstanding and honorable. There's enough negativity in the world. There's enough hatred and stereotyping to fill up volumes. The media often clings to those things that are certain to up readership and line pockets. However, this is the stuff that we should all make viral, friends. Well played, United. Well played. So, let's do it, people. Let's make it viral. Go to thepilotwifelife.com. There's a link in the show notes. Copy it, share it. You know what to do. You know, often our community connections start forming in college. I know mine sure did. And I attended a university where research was the name of the game. It was really cool to be able to participate in studies that would later go on to change the industry, one small project at a time. And when I saw Purdue named in a flying magazine article, well, I had to read on. The article is called Purdue Alums Create Radio Communications Simulator. The simulator demands understanding, not simply memorization. And it's by Rob Mark in Flying Magazine, February 21st, 2019. He writes, learning the language of air traffic control is often difficult enough for student pilots who speak native English, let alone for student pilots from other countries. To make it easier for pilot applicants to become proficient in English, the native language of air traffic control, two Purdue University graduates, Muharrem Mane and Aaron Hadamiloglu, created Plain English. It's a smartphone simulator that interactively trains and tests pilots in realistic environments to develop advanced skills in aviation phraseology and communication. Plain English also delivers instantaneous feedback to students through voice recognition and speech analysis. Learning how to handle ATC radio communications can be difficult for people who are not native English speakers. The app comes with more than 50 lessons to guide users through simple and complicated interactions with air traffic control on every phase of flight, from taxi to takeoff to airspace entrance to approaches to taxiback. Each simulation includes visual cues that show altitude, distance from an airport, and direction. A variety of airports can be selected, or one will be randomly selected for the user. Users must respond properly in specific situations using the correct phraseology, speech rate, and other factors. There can be as many as 5 or 6 exchanges back and forth with air traffic control. Users are then graded on those responses and given an opportunity to listen to their responses. Mane said, memorizing the lessons won't work since the system changes something each and every time the scenario is run. Plain English is currently available only for Android devices, although the company has launched a Kickstarter campaign to fund the development of the app for the iPhone. The app is available on a monthly, twice annual, or annual subscription for as little as $4.99 a month. Turns out the three of us were at Purdue at the same time, but we never actually met. But as a controller and a CFI, though, I'm always interested in anything that'll help pilots master ATC communications. Because every time I had a primary student when I was a CFI, or every time I give a talk or presentation, I'm always asked by pilots, of all levels, actually, how can I improve and understand my communications with ATC? Or, words to that effect. And there's an underlying theme that seems to be building when people ask, and that's, how isn't there a technology to help us learn radio communications? Well, there is. And as AI technology grows, it gets cheaper and easier to adapt technology to this kind of purpose. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's getting more and more doable every day. And I realize it's not like there's never been a comm simulator before. I mean, even the early versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator had communications built in, even in the 90s. But it wasn't really good for training. It sounded kind of cool later on, but it was really too basic and it was not very interactive. And I know other softwares have come out that are pretty good too, but they aren't really directed at pilots for whom English isn't their first language. And we all know that there's a lot of hate that goes around when there's a fresh non-English speaker on the frequency, right? Like, how do you understand what they just said? People ask me all the time. But instead of the smack talk, well, maybe there's something we can just do to help them out. So I'm interested. And I wonder if these guys might have the answer.
My name is Mohar Emane, and together with my partner Aaron, we are the co-founders of Plain English, the aviation radio simulator. We like to think it's the one and only aviation radio simulator. Plain English provides pilots the combination of accessibility and feedback to create an active learning experience for both new pilots and those old pilots that are thinking about getting back into flying. The variations in scenarios in plain English provide the means to practice in realistic situations and enable pilots to gain radio telephony experience outside of the cockpit. So, with plain English, pilots are not limited to reading manuals about what radio communication should be, or listening to CDs or videos or online recordings of communication, but they can actually get to practice it and build that critical muscle memory that will serve them well while they're flying and trying to do the other important things of flying. So, I did aero and astro engineering. That was all my Purdue work, or almost all of it. But so my undergrad was in aero and astro engineering, and then graduate still aero and astro, but with a focus in aerospace systems.
Okay.
And then there was masters and then PhD, some more of that systems optimization. I got into a little bit into operations research and even transportation engineering. I got another, besides my aero masters, I managed to get another master's in transportation systems from civil engineering.
You were there a long time.
Yes.
Well, cool. So, let's just start right there then. I mean, so, you did all this stuff at Purdue and you have all these, degrees and on certifications and so on, but why do something like plain English?
Let me see. So I was there. So in 2010, 2011, it's when I got, always been interested in airplanes, and finally managed to get both the courage and the money together to start flying. So it was in 2010, 11, and 12 that I started flying to get my private pilot's license. So that's when I got exposed, like to the flying side of things, and then that's how I. Well, it wasn't through flying, but it was about the same time that I met Aaron as well, and we're going through through the flight training together. And this was just one of those things that we kept, both of us kind of kept struggling, or is one of the things that we talked about whenever we were going through flight school. And Aaron was the one that was more technologically, I don't know, up to date at the time, at least for the flying part. So he was the one that had the little handheld radio. We would listen to the tower, whenever we were at the coffee shop, and just get a little bit more exposure to how these guys were talking. So it was, I don't know. This was one of those things that after we got done with flight training, that we kept talking about, and we kind of felt a little bit frustrated that there wasn't anything better out there. And it seemed something that we had the ability and like a little bit of the know-how of how to actually make it work. So quite a few years later, we kept talking about it, and how we'd go about it. So we managed to put our minds together and give it a go.
All right. Well, tell me a little bit about your partner, Aaron, then. So you were both going through flight training at the same time, but do you have similar backgrounds?
No, so so we met there about the same at about the same time. Aaron had been working. So he actually started his undergrad like about 2008, 2009. We're about the same age, but he had another. He had moved to Lafayette recently. He was doing some other jobs, and he was excited about flying as well. So he wanted to be a pilot and get into aviation. So he started flying just to learn how to fly. He was the one that talked me into it. So I started it, like as well, and then like I stopped, got my license, and managed to keep flying every so often. I have about just about 100 hours like a flight time, but he kept on flying. He eventually did aviation management as his degree, and then through that got his instrument. I think got his commercial, and he's got about just about 800 hours, a little bit over 800 hours of flight time built in. So he managed to build in a lot more flying experience than me. Um, and his like his degree ended up being in aviation management. He even has the FCC restricted radio operator license. And he currently works at an airport in Texas.
What was it about the communications that you found the most difficult to learn?
The biggest, the thing that struck me about it, at thinking back, was that when I first got on the airplane, I remember, I sat on the left side, after doing all the pre-flight checks. I sat on the left side. I got to start the engine. I got to taxi the airplane. And I had the instructor was the one that actually like took off, and then he gave me the controls right away. And in that whole first hour and a half of flight, he did not let me touch the radio. He was the one that was doing that. So that was my maybe the first experience I had with trying to talk on the radio was that I wasn't supposed to quite yet. And then after that, it was just hard to try and be comfortable after you push that button, when the only time when I'd get any exposure to it or any instructions about it was my instructor tell me, hey, this is say this to the to tower, or say this to ground. And eventually it took like a few times when I knew to get the permission to taxi and then take off and so forth. But it was always turning my head to the right and be like, hey, how do I say this? And I didn't go through a formal flight training program. So that was the only instruction that I got on how to talk on the radio, just asking the instructor and him telling me, things right there and then. So it was basically, I had no way of learning it. I did all the, reading manuals and guidelines and how you do it. But again, it was just reading it and nothing more hands-on. And you could hear to all these guys that knew how to, talk on the radio, and like, okay, great, I can hear them do it, but now I got to do it on my own. So it was just the thing that, scared me or, intimidated me about it, is that I didn't have the instruction and a way to just keep repeating and repeating it so I could get better at it. It was just the only time I had available was to do it while I was flying. And with everything else that I was like trying to do, it always took a second seat to to the actual flying the airplane and learning the other stuff I was supposed to be doing.
How does it actually work to give you that experience that you need in two-way communication to actually make you better?
Well, so the way that we've built the plain English simulator, it's essentially around four main things. One is a situational awareness to enable you to communicate. The other one is this challenge and response feature. The other part is feedback, and the last one, it's a variation. So on the situational awareness, so what we've done is we've taken basically all the information that you need to have available to be able to communicate on the radio. So we're not doing any of the flying part. You're not trying to fly the airplane here. You just have the minimum information that you need to communicate. Things like what's your call sign, where are you located, what's your airspeed, what's your altitude, and so forth. So what your aid is. So again, the things that you need to just talk. And then obviously, if you're on the airplane, you can look outside. So you have your maps with you. So we have diagrams of either the airport or sectional like diagrams of the airspace where you're located. So that's one. The other part is this idea of challenge and response. So we've built in into the simulator. So you have two buttons. One is for the mic, and one is for one is the mic, and one is the headphones or ATC. So when you're presented this information, you would get a prompt to say, hey, you are located at the south ramp. You got your ATIS, like it's kilo, and you're ready to taxi. So you hit the mic key, and then you talk, and you say the phraseology, and you make the request to Lafayette ground, for example. And then after that, then you would get to hear air traffic control. So like Lafayette ground in this case, talk back to you and give you the clearance that you need. So this, challenge response. So you're doing the whole back and forth that you do with ATC through the simulator. The cool, part about it is besides just talking, it's where the feedback comes in. So every time you hit the mic and you talk, as soon as you get done talking, we have a real time analysis of what the pilot just said and give them feedback. Did they say the entire phraseology correctly? Which words did they actually miss? Were they speaking too slow, too fast? Were they, delaying, making a lot of pauses? And in the end, well, not in the end, but just right away, give them a feedback, like from 0 to 100, red to green on how well they did. So that's that's a feedback part. And obviously, when you get to the end of the lesson, for instance, you would get an overall rating, based on how accurate what you said was, speech delay, and speech rate. So we're calling it a radio proficiency score. And then the other part is variation. So every time you're doing a taxi out from Lafayette, for example, it will change. So ground will give you a different route. It will give you a different runway. Every time you do a lesson, you get variation. So you have to think a little bit as to what you're being said and what you have to say, and not just keep looking at the same information all the time and essentially memorizing it and not really helping you in learning and practice. And so all these things put together, what we're trying to do is provide the pilots with a radio on their mobile device and a means for them to have repetition into practicing how to talk on the radio.
Interesting. Now, what did you use to benchmark that, like the pilot controller glossary, and how do you grade things like speech rate?
Well, so we have, we've built our entire, the phraseology and radio procedures. I mean, we have, gotten our hands into any manual and guidelines from ICAO, FAA that we could get our hands on, from some of the even air circulars. There was like a couple of recent ones, for example, that did some changes on how you do how do you communicate like on the radio for untowered airports. So we've gotten those as well. We've used those as the baseline for creating our content and phraseology, and then and again use mainly those FAA and ICAO standards for speech rate, for example. I don't remember on top of my head, but I think it's 100 words per minute. That's the bench line for the ICAO bench line. So we use that one for our score, for the speech accuracy. So that again, we've made our own. There is to like how many of the key words that you need to say for your readback is acceptable, things like that.
Interesting. I know there's obviously a lot of subjectivity in that, like when it comes to what can and should and maybe has to be read back. How did you guys sift through some of the subjectivity when it comes to how you're going to grade someone on what they did or didn't say?
Well, the way that we went about it, again, went from that minimum necessary information. When you look at the guidelines, how do you how do you talk to ATC? It's your basic of who you're talking to, who you are, where you are, and what you want, right?
Yep.
So all those four things. So, and we've just made it. You have to have these four pieces of information, and whenever you're doing a taxi out, for example, I mean, it's as simple as you're talking to ground. So Lafayette ground. I mean, those are the minimum two words that you need to say. So unless you say you say Lafayette or you say ground, then you only got half of it. The other part is like who you are. Then you got to use your call sign. So you're provided the call sign, so we kind of know or it's expected what you should be saying. And then given the situation that we're presenting the user in, so in this case, if you're at a taxi out, we're giving you, hey, you're at this location, so you should say where that where that location is, and then what you want. It's again, in what phase of flight are you in? You're a taxi out. The only thing you should be saying, it's I'm ready to taxi. So it's only those, again, the minimum words, the minimum amount of information that you need to make that request, and that's and we've created those for every all phases of flight, and all for a whole lot of scenarios. So a lot of content thinking about the permutations that you could have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
The other part that we have is in August of 2018 we launched the Android version of Plain English, and that was because the developer that we were able to find at the time had Android experience. So we started out with that. We're actively working right now on developing the iOS version, and we plan so in April, about mid-April, we plan to launch Plain English for iOS, and we're really excited about that one because we'll be able to really reach a lot of the U.S. U.S. pilots. So that's one of the important things to mention out there. So we have Android, but we're gonna get iOS out very soon, and then. What we plan to do in the future for this, the additional content that we want to have in there, we want to include a lot more scenarios and lessons for IFR and help train those pilots that are beyond the private pilot's license, but are going for the commercial. And that's a future other stuff right now. So we see Plain English as a tool not only for non-English speakers. A lot of the questions that we have to answer, it says, "Oh, this is a tool for people that don't speak English." But I just tell everybody, and I think everybody that's a pilot that's gone through the pains of learning to talk on the radio, that it doesn't really matter if you speak English or not. Talking on the radio, it's almost like a foreign language in and of itself. You need to get comfortable doing it, and you have to have the practice. So. The tool that we put together here, it's both for English speakers and non-English speakers.
All right, now for that special part of the show where we get to talk about the podcasting on a plane community, like what's going on with you all, and give thanks to the special listeners who support the show on Patreon or through feedback and questions, comments, whatever. And for this time, I've really got a lot to be thankful for because we've got several new show supporters. So let's welcome them. Our new patrons are Lars Petter Eliasson, Tom Kane, Alex Campbell, David Stroh, Anthony Hoots, Daniel Sternberg, Jimmy Rikas, and he left a nice review on iTunes back in December. Thank you, Jimmy. And we have a new multi-engine supporter, Thomas Qualwasser. He joined and then edited his pledge up. Thanks, Thomas. And we have a new ATP supporter as well, Jamie Ploon. I hope I pronounced your name right. So, a long overdue welcome to you all, and thank you so much for supporting the podcast. And of course, let's not forget some of the show's longer standing and extra generous supporters like Paula and Vince, Brian Juarez, the photo mission pilot. Check him out on Instagram and on episodes 21 and 32. And of course, there's Jeff Riolo from Empower UAV. You can check him out for all of your drone needs. Ted Crossan, the pilot extraordinaire. And without getting into any further detail here than is necessary, my condolences to you, Ted. Also, Captain Jeff. That's right, the one and only airline pilot guy himself. And media expert Joe Godfrey. Thank you all. And a different kind of special thank you to Echo. He treated me to a whole bunch of coffees over at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, Echo. And whenever you're listening to this, well, I'm probably still awake. Oh, and he left a note, too. He says, I have to say that episode 42 was tailor-made for me. Without going into a full-blown resume, I've been an avionics technician in the military and in civilian life, and I'm currently an A&P, an IA, and a director of maintenance for a corporate flight department, and a private instrument-rated pilot working on the commercial and multi-engine. So I can get typed SIC and eventually PIC in my flight department's Falcon 900LX. Nice. I know firsthand the value of being able to cross between several jobs, and I also recently started writing again, and I've realized how much I missed the hell out of it. Airfax Journal is publishing one of my stories in April, and I couldn't be more excited. I think that I may try to make aviation journalism my 5th full-time gig at some point in the near future, behind husband, father, director of maintenance, business owner, and pilot. It's been on my mind for the past few years, but your podcast threw some fuel on that fire. Thanks again for your contributions to the industry, and I'll be listening for that shout-out. Elliot Cox, better known as Echo. Well, there it is, Elliot. Thank you so much. And speaking of coffees and hanging out, I had a real coffee, like in person, with listener Perry Heyman the other day. He's in aerospace engineering, and he's also a reservist. So he was out west to put in that time over the weekend. And we talked a lot about flying as a career switch or maybe even as a side thing. And I don't really think we solved any of the world's bigger problems, but we had an awesome time talking about flying. So Perry, thanks again for the coffee, and I hope we can do it again soon. I also want to give a huge thank you and shout out to a guy named Tony Hernandez. And he was the catalyst that finally got this show on Google Podcasts. Yeah, it's been on Google Play for a long time, but I incorrectly assumed that it was also on the regular Google Podcast directory too. But nope. So he brought it to my attention and showed me a resource to figure out what was going on. And it took us a while, but we got it. So this show now is officially on Google Podcasts as well. Tony, you are the man. Thank you so much. And also another shout out to a tech supporter named Ken Hayes. And he helped me with an RSS feed issue I was having in Patreon. So if you're a patron of the show, you should now be able to subscribe to the feed within Patreon and get your content that way. So thank you, Ken. If you want to support the show, head on over to podcastingonaplane.com/support or patreon.com/podcastingonaplane to get started. And you get patron-only exclusive content that doesn't make it onto the show. And you also get your episodes a little bit early too. And if you want to shoot me an email, the address is brandon@podcastingonaplane.com. And I'd always love to hear what's on your aviation mind. And make sure to follow on social media too. I do my best to post photos very regularly on Instagram, at least a few times a week. So follow me at podcastingonaplane. On Twitter, it's at podcastonaplane. And even if you don't like anything else about Facebook, I'd appreciate it if you'd head over there and like the Facebook page too. That way you can enjoy aviation photography, videos, articles I like to share, and more. So until next time, your frequency change is approved, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.